Project-based learning has been a buzzword in education for the better part of 15 years. It was on the precipice of becoming very common when I was a student in university. There were words about it and discussions about it. But in terms of it being something that is common and that all schools are trying to implement, it's really been in this last 5 to 10 years where you've seen it explode in popularity. And so what happens is, like with many trends in education, that superintendents or principals or teachers are trying to keep up with the times and bring in this new methodology, this thing that is proven to work, that gets kids excited, and they want to implement it in their school. And sometimes they do it correctly, sometimes they do it incorrectly. Oftentimes they do it just so that they can show the parents or the school board or whoever it is that they're doing something, right? But those of them who are the most interested in doing it successfully call schools like us, like Isla, who've been doing this for a long time, and they ask advice and questions on how to do this. And so one of the most common questions that I get, it happens after a school has tried to implement project-based learning and they've felt unsuccessful with it. And so I want to talk about that in this video. The most common reason that the schools find difficulty with this is that they don't actually trust project-based learning. Instead of what you should do, which is start with the project, fully designed, an idea, a vision from the beginning, and work backwards from there. We are going to produce this. We are going to solve this. We are going to answer this big driving question. We're going to spend this much time working towards that. If you don't start with that, right, something that drives your inquiry, then what ends up happening is a school does this. They will say, well, we have 6 weeks to teach this unit on the Revolutionary War. And instead of teaching it for 6 weeks, we're going to cram all of our content into 4 weeks. And we're going to spend the last 2 weeks taking the content that we learned and doing an additional activity, another project. The problem with that is, of course, you're trying to take all that content of 6 weeks and squeezing it into 4. It's a lot of stress on the teacher. And then the other issue is for the students, they don't really understand the reason why they would do that project. They already learned that content. So they went through that process and that experience, they learned it, and now you're giving them an additional activity to do on top of what they've already done. It feels burdensome. You get pushback and resistance from students, you get stress on the teacher, and then eventually the principal hears so much of this that they say, project-based learning doesn't work in our school, right? But if you start from the beginning, the risk associated with that many people feel is like, well, if we start with this big idea and this big project, what if the students don't learn anything? Well, this could be farther from the truth. In the proper design of a project with a big idea and a driving question that shoots for research and information and content, your students are not only going to learn all of the content that you hoped, but they're going to be begging you to learn that content. It comes from a place of saying, hey, I want to learn this because of the big idea, the big driving question, the big project that I'm going to create. A cool example of this, and I think one that I like to share with a lot of people, is we did a unit many years ago on dystopian literature. And I had a high school teacher there who I had been going back and forth with on the need to do backwards planning. And in the early stages of planning this unit, she had a pretty cool idea. And when she came up with the idea and she built the plan for the unit, she looked at me and said, I think we'll be done with this in a couple of weeks. And her question was, then what do we do? And the plan was that her students were going to create an alternative society, much like you might see in a lot of dystopian literature. They were going to overthrow the school government and present that in the form of a nice skit in front of the families at our presentation day. Well, they wrote the script for this, and it is true, they finished this within a couple of weeks. But because they had the time, because they were planning this giant presentation, because they were interested in this emotional experience, the students then ended up saying, we need to write a constitution. We need to create a flag. We need to learn how to march. We need to learn how to add music so that when we do this overthrow of the government, it's going to come in the form of this like dramatic experience. We need to learn how to create uniforms for our military. We need to learn how to do makeup because they ended up creating a very unique look for their people. We need to learn how to write laws. And over and over and over again, a project that could have been a couple of weeks and it could have easily been tacked on to the end of a unit on dystopian literature or revolutions became something that drove these students not only to learn everything that we had hoped they would learn in the process, but literally to feel it, to experience it, and to never forget it.